probably just a little comment, a little bit aside. Have you noticed that in, I don't know, it's the last 10 years maybe, that people are not saying Protestant as much? They're just using the word Christian. Pay attention, it's amazing. I mean, because Protestant means going against basically, you know, Lutheran Catholic people in general, I would think. But they're not saying Protestant anymore. They're saying they're Christian, because they want everybody to join together, Catholics and Lutherans, etc. But they're not saying Protestant. It's kind of
well, but I also think that as Catholics, we also need to start saying Christian a little more. Yeah, we need to, that's our word. We got that from Jesus. It's like, well, I mean, those were the people, the followers of Jesus who were in Antioch were first called Christians there. They weren't called Catholics. Catholics, it's a later word. It comes actually from the councils. Councils were the ones who created terminology like Catholic, Orthodox. Because those were ways of showing who was the right faith and who was the wrong faith. And so that was, but Christian, I mean, it's a good word.
It is good.
Yeah, and then with the Protestants, it's a mess. I mean, you try to figure out who's who, and like Episcopalians don't like to be called Protestants because they're from a different issue. And, so it's like, unless you know exactly what you're going to say, and you're going to be careful not to offend anyone. So we have enough problems, it's good to build some bridges.
Father, when did the practice of making the sign of the cross start?
Well, the making of the sign of the cross, really, I guess we can kind of surmise that it was already present in the late 4th century. Before Constantine, Constantine had, as a part of his conversion experience, he had a vision. And in this vision, he saw a symbol that we, generally speaking, it is the cross. It was referred to as the Greek cross, the 2 bars of the same size intersecting. And he heard a voice say, "In this sign you will be victorious." And so he had to put on all the cavalry and soldiers on all the shields, and they won, and he became the emperor. And that began kind of a process of rehabilitation of the cross. Because the cross, up until that time, and even after Constantine, was still being used as a means of execution. So for the early Christians, the symbol that you would find in a Christian home was a fish. It was a tracing of a fish. Because the Greek word for fish is ichthys. And ichthys take the 5 letters, and they mean Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. Each letter begins another word. It was the oldest profession of faith. But the cross itself, because it had the charm of the electric chair. I mean, that's you want to compare it, that's what it is. And for the early Christians, there was no pride in saying, our God died on a cross. And one of the oldest anti-Christian graffiti that is found actually in the city of Rome is a cross with a man and a jackass's head. And that's taken as an anti-Christian symbol. That was because they ridiculed the early Christians. It was the most horrific death that the Romans inflicted on people they hated the most. And it was so widespread, any nationality that rebelled against the Romans, they would round up the rebels, they would crucify them and line the road that goes into the city. So that all the people who were coming into the city for commerce, all the people who were leaving the city, going out to the villages, would have to pass by literally hundreds of people crucified, dying on the crosses slowly. So there was really nothing glorious about it. So Constantine, when he had this vision, it was a little different cross. That's why he didn't seem to recognize it. He had to ask the religious leaders to interpret his vision. And it was his mother who gave him the answer, that it was the cross. The cross was not as we see it now, we kind of have it done up in a nice uniform way. It was actually a bar. The central bar was a much thicker bar that was firmly planted into the ground very deep. And then it was used for many, many, many years, even centuries. And that same cross, they would be crucified onto the arm beam, and then that would be pulled up. But that bar was planted into the ground, and that stayed there. And so that's why Constantine didn't recognize that simple symbol, because he was thinking, the cross was a little different. But he started the process. He literally began the process of taking this symbol that brought him victory, and he began to use it to decorate the churches. And he adorned it with gold and silver. And so it slowly began to change. And the cross then was featured, you could say, the PR that he did around it that was so successful was firstly the creation of a holiday, the exaltation of the cross. When St. Helena went to the Holy Land and found the cross, September 14th. And then one of the Lenten Sundays was dedicated also to the cross. And of course, the terminology, it was the life-giving cross. But it took a lot of work to take something that was the symbol of death for many generations and then make it into something that had a completely different meaning. So, and that would also then, as far as the sign of the cross, the blessing with the cross, even the tracing of the cross, all of that was not popular, and it was part of this process of making it a very practical symbol of death, which reminds us of life. But you have to change a whole mindset of people who saw it as something different. Yes?
Is there anything in the apocryphal writings that talk about, I have heard one time that Jesus and his mother Mary had a very special bond between the two of them, where all they had to do was look at each other, and through their eyes they could talk to each other. Is there any writings about that?
No, that's, and I think that could be perhaps there are a couple of different writings. That sounds more like a couple of medieval stories that I've come across. And that is based, though, on some of the gospel things. Mary has very few words there. And so, she says, hey, they're running out of wine. and Jesus' reaction is like, yeah, who cares? And then she goes and she tells them, to do whatever he says. So I think a lot of people through, especially that exchange, they've been able to draw out of it that, there is a unique relationship there. As far as, I don't think it would ever make it to the apocryphal gospels, because of course one of the worries is about giving Jesus supernatural type powers, where he could read people's minds or something, and that was one thing they were very careful of, because these stories could build on the ancient Roman gods and goddesses who had weird gifts like that. And so that's why one of those things. But there are different visionaries who, especially in the beginning of the Middle Ages to the 18th century, who write different stories about visions they had, and they talk about some of these things. Of course, some of these stories are really, really weird, because, Jesus comes out as being blonde and blue-eyed and not Jewish-looking at all. It's and I know that's a very popular thing artistically. You'll find that in a lot of different paintings. But believe me, if he looked different from any Jewish kid running around in Nazareth 2,000 years ago, that would have been in the Gospels. It was because it would have been an unusual part of his being. And but those are produced a lot of different little insights. Yes?
Oh, I was going to see, in the Old Testament, is there any significance to a cross or a cow? Because there's a story where Francis used a cow for...
Well, there are a couple of course, everything that's in the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, ends up somehow being cross-related, cross-referenced into the Old Testament. And so, for example, the tree of life that brought death to Adam and Eve becomes the tree of the cross that brought death to Jesus and yet life through Jesus' death and resurrection. So that's a related one. The Tao, the Franciscan one, so that's connected to Moses. That's connected to Moses. When the people of Israel were leaving from Egypt, and so he erected, basically it's like a serpent that they could look at because they were being bitten by venomous serpents. And it was their lack of faith, and so this was when they beheld it, they were cured.
Was it you all heard the cow and the Orient was memory like?
Yeah, well, and there are different connections, but it's not in the same sense. And of course, Jesus' cross is not exactly, it's not a Tao. I mean, it was done. It was a regular cross, I mean, a full cross beam. But again, symbols become kind of, they overlap. And that is a part of, like I was talking about Mary's role as temple in relationship to the Temple of Jerusalem. These were very important because they show a continuity. They show that, this is not, Jesus coming into the world in the Incarnation was not something that completely derailed human history and the relationship between the people of Israel and God. It fulfilled it. It was the next level, the next step. And so, and that's why these symbols are so interconnected, and it was so important for people to be able to look at the text and see the Old Testament, see the prophets, hear the words of the prophets echoed in Jesus' words. Yeah.